Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to share our perspective from Massachusetts on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. My name is Jane Wynn, and I am Executive Director of Berkshire Environmental Action Team, or BEAT, in Western Massachusetts. I'm also speaking for Rosemary Wessel, Program Director for No Fracked Gas in Mass. For Kinder Morgan's Connecticut expansion pipeline in Massachusetts, FERC authorized the condemnation of publicly protected conservation land and preemption of the state process for disposition of that publicly protected conservation land. In Massachusetts, we have Article 97 of our state constitution that protects conservation lands. Under this provision, a change in use of protected public land is not allowed unless 2/3 of each chamber of our legislature votes to allow the protection to be removed. Even for an easement, this vote is required. In the case of the Connecticut expansion pipeline, FERC did not require the pipeline company to honor the state's constitutional process. Instead, FERC punted to the courts the question of the state's authority to protect land rather than making compliance with Article 97 a condition of the FERC certificate, as many commenters had requested. The land in question is part of Otis State Forest and was acquired just a decade ago at great expense to the taxpayer. The town of Sandusfield also chose to forego tax revenue on this land so they could gain the benefit of, quote unquote, permanently protected state forest and a spectacular pond to attract tourists and make the town a more desirable place to live. The land in question is in Berkshire County, as far from the coast of Massachusetts as you can get. Kinder Morgan, unable to obtain support or consent of local legislators, convinced a representative from the coast, the opposite end of the state, to introduce a bill to release the protection on this land. There was a hearing in Boston, and people from all across the state traveled to the State House to fill the room, all with signs announcing where we were each from. No vote was ever taken because of the public outrage, combined with the principled stance of the committee chair, who wouldn't allow the bill to advance because Kinder Morgan never provided the information he had requested. Thus, the land was not released from protection. Kinder Morgan sued in local superior court, and the judge ruled the Natural Gas Act preempted our state constitution. To our disappointment, our Attorney General has not appealed. We feel there are many alternatives to going through this conservation land, and we could lose a precious resource also that Kinder Morgan can profit. There is no benefit to Massachusetts. All the gas is going to local distribution companies in Connecticut to be sold to homes and businesses in Connecticut. Many believe this route was chosen as a test case to see whether the Massachusetts constitutional protections could preempt the Natural Gas Act. BEAT, with a citizens group, have appealed the 401 water quality permit for this pipeline that was granted by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, in part because we seek to protect the water resources on this conservation land that should be protected under our state constitution. Our appeal will be held in January. Thank you for holding this hearing and allowing me to speak for our organizations in Massachusetts.
Hello. My name is Patrick Robbins. I'm the co-director of Sane Energy Project, a New York City-based climate advocacy group that is dedicated to a socially just transition, fully away from fossil fuels toward a renewable energy system. And I just want to say that it is a privilege to be here with so many courageous people from so many different parts of the country. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is a disgrace. The very idea of government oversight is based on the simple principle that certain common goods are too important to be exploited or degraded for private profit. If anything, FERC does the opposite by facilitating the destruction of the commons by rubber stamping disastrous gas infrastructure projects and looking the other way as companies trample public resources. When Spectra Energy proposed its AIM pipeline to run right through a county park, the beautiful and ecologically sensitive Blue Mountain Reservation in Westchester County, New York, FERC said fine. when a local official, the corrupt Westchester County executive, Rob Astorino, who, by the way, received $43,000 for his reelection bid from a Spectra Energy business partner, when Astorino circumvented the standard parkland alienation process, which would have allowed the legislature to have a say and allowed for greater public input, FERC said, okay. And when Spectra Energy illegally dredged a wetland in order to find a drill bit that they lost during their attempted drill under the Hudson River, FERC basically said that as long as Spectra was sorry and promised never to do it again, that too was acceptable. This is not okay. Regulatory agencies are supposed to protect the interests and the resources that belong to the people. By trampling on these resources and shutting people out of the decision-making process, this is not just behavior that's inappropriate for a regulatory agency, it is an attack on the very idea of the public good. Maybe the most dire threat to the public good right now is climate change. We know that climate change is already leading to mass extinction, social upheaval, and widespread misery in places where droughts, flash floods, or forest fires are becoming the new normal. That's why the White House Council on Environmental Quality released a guidance in August 2016 for all federal agencies to consider climate impacts in their NEPA review processes and to consider alternatives. Alternatives to fossil fuels are abundant. In Massachusetts, for example, Attorney General Maura Healey commissioned a study that found that all projected demand growth for energy could be met through energy efficiency measures and demand response technology. Yet FERC continues to grant permits for fossil fuel pipelines across the country, even in the face of these alternatives. This violates the CEQ guidance on climate change, certainly, but it also demonstrates how deep FERC's contempt is for the public good, that they would disregard the clear guidance of the highest office in the country, the will of the people, and ultimately the stability of our common climate for private companies. This is why I'm here to support a full congressional hearing and re-examination of FERC's authority under the Natural Gas Act. I believe in the public good. I believe that it is an idea that especially now must be protected, and I'm here to say that if FERC won't do it, we will. Thank you.
Hello, it is an honor to be here. My name is Ernie Read, and I'm the president of Wild Virginia. Wild Virginia's mission is to protect and preserve the wild natural ecosystems of Virginia's national forests. Today, there's no greater threat to Virginia's forests than two 42-inch high-pressure interstate fracked gas pipelines proposed to bisect 3 national forests. The Mountain Valley Pipeline and the Atlantic Coast Pipeline together total over 900 miles of infrastructure at a cost of approximately $10 billion. They are proposed to take fracked gas from the Marcellus Shale region of West Virginia, slice across the Allegheny Plateau and the Blue Ridge Mountains, and intersect the Transco main line that currently fully serves the East Coast and operates with 45% of its capacity unused. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has refused to analyze the purpose and need of these projects as required by the National Environmental Policy Act. Publicly funded independent analysis has demonstrated that these pipelines are not necessary to supply projected demand in the East. Yet permitting these would allow the full cost of these projects to be charged to ratepayers. The Mountain Valley Pipeline would require a new 3.4-mile, 500-foot wide corridor through the Jefferson National Forest in West Virginia and Virginia. It would slice through the Appalachian National Scenic Trail, blast its way along the edges of 2 federally designated wilderness areas, and bisect an inventoried roadless area and an old-growth management area. For the MVP, FERC has issued a severely deficient draft environmental impact statement that has prematurely started the public comment period. The document allows critical information and analysis required by the United States Forest Service to be submitted later, keeping the public in the dark and undermining the public comment process as required by NEPA. For example, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy estimates that as many as 19 prominent AT vistas will be severely impacted by this project. The public has documented numerous caves, streams, and springs missing from the analysis. These are just some of the dozens of undocumented and unanalyzed direct impacts of the MVP. The Atlantic Coast Pipeline is proposed to bisect over 20 miles of national forest lands through the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia and the George Washington National Forest in Virginia. Dominion has proposed to bore 800 feet deep and 4,200 vertical feet through the spine of the Blue Ridge underneath the AT and the Blue Ridge Parkway. Boring this distance through billion-year-old rock is unprecedented and untested. Yet FERC has assumed that Dominion's default plan, should boring be deemed unfeasible, that's a quote, of conventional blasting, assumed that the default plan of conventional blasting and trenching across the AT and the Parkway with a 125-foot clear-cut construction corridor needs no environmental or economic impact analysis. The Appalachian Trail and the Blue Ridge Parkway are national treasures, enjoyed by millions of people each year. The ACP and MVP are just 2 of 4 proposed pipelines that would cross the AT. The Atlantic Sunrise Project and the Penn East Project would cross the AT in Pennsylvania, adding permanent damage that also can't be mitigated. The Blue Ridge Parkway is the second most visited National Park Service area, far outpacing any national park, and second only to the commuter lanes of San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge. The central Appalachian forests have the highest level of biological diversity in the entire country. Yet on November 25th, the Federal Register published a notice, a draft notice, to create a DEIS for a, quote, oil and gas coalition multi-state habitat conservation plan to, quote, streamline environmental permitting for 9 companies in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. This would result in the issuance of a 50-year incidental taking permit for 5 different rare, threatened, and endangered bat species, making a mockery of the Endangered Species Act, the FERC NEPA process, and likely doom these species to extinction. The impacts of these pipelines over 5 states clearly speaks to the programmatic nature of the permitting of natural gas pipelines. FERC refuses to undertake any programmatic analysis of the 3,000 miles of proposed pipelines east of the Mississippi. Federal agencies, the U.S. Forest Service, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Bureau of Land Management, and the Army Corps need to put their heads together to honestly evaluate the need for this infrastructure and to analyze all of their impacts combined. The FERC permitting process for natural gas infrastructure is a runaway train engineered by profit-seeking energy companies, crushing everything in its path. It needs to be stopped. Thank you.
Geralyn, Irene Leach.
I have dealt with FERC for nearly 30 years as a consumer advocate working on consumer pocketbook issues. During that time, the consumer community has sought a consumer-focused office at FERC to balance the public and energy industry influence. We have failed every time. We have become increasingly frustrated with FERC's structure and procedures and the revolving door between it and the industry. Currently, I am in the fight of my life to protect my heritage in the form of the farm that we have operated for over 100 years. My husband and I are the 4th consecutive generation to seek to pass this historical business to the next generation, and we had planned to retire there. However, a 42-inch high-pressure pipeline is proposed to bisect our business for over a mile. Almost all of our farm buildings, an 1804 farmhouse, which is largely unchanged over the years, with historic outbuildings, will be in the blast or high consequence zone. Just 3 miles after one of the largest compressor stations built. That station, as you've already heard, will change the historic Virginia free slave community to an industrial center, ignoring our request to protect history. Likewise, attempts to move the pipeline to our property edge instead of bisecting it have been ignored due to our unwillingness to sign an easement prior to the FERC's certificate approval. It will not be safe to live the rest of my life within the blast zone of infrastructure that is primarily governed by corporate profit incentives. The history our property represents is at a risk of total loss. There are lower government and company investments in rural safety and higher rates of explosion in rural areas. The gas will be under the highest pressure as it comes through the middle of our historic business. An accidental explosion would completely erase almost all of our structures and the lives of people and the animals that we grow. The surveys of historic and cultural attachments that FERC accepts are extremely superficial and allow destruction of history. Staff doing archaeological studies have been fired for looking too closely for historical significance for reports to FERC. People taking of or impact on historic property feel totally unheard by FERC. Public meetings are planned with corporate, but not citizen involvement. The only public meeting held in Buckingham County for the compressor station, that'll be 3 to 4 miles from our property, was held the night after a large snowstorm, the largest that we had last winter. We repeatedly asked for rescheduling due to weather, but the company refused and was thrilled that only 30 people attended. FERC cannot learn about citizen concerns about historic properties when citizens cannot safely attend meetings. I am also fighting the Mountain Valley Pipeline proposed near the 1797 log house, originally built as a stagecoach wayside in Southwest Virginia, where we have lived for over 30 years. The unannounced but planned, we know because a landowner has been approached for buying the land, and now we know that there's a tap to the Mountain Valley Pipeline planned. So this unannounced compressor station will be within about 5 miles of my Montgomery County property. Its pollution and explosion risk will affect us. FERC's recent DEIS public hearing, as you've heard, used an extremely slow, private, individual process for testimony that prohibited citizens and the media from hearing, and many, including me, gave up trying to testify after 3 hours. In short, FERC is designed to approve industry requests and inherently almost completely ignores consumers and landowners. Pending law in Congress would further streamline this. FERC forces us to pass on historic property with liability and risk that threaten heritage, earning potential, and asset value. FERC is broken for all but the industry. It needs to be fixed.
Okay, Geralyn, one more chance on this group.
Got a note from Russell who's going to
Okay.
stand in.
Great, thank you.
I'll read for Geralyn. The plays is she's my neighbor, and a lot less rough around the edges, so if you can imagine that. She's entitled this Newport, Virginia, a treasured rural community. Our family has lived for 50 years on a farm in Newport, Virginia. Not a long time compared with many families whose roots go back 7 and 9 generations, back to the Revolutionary times. We moved into this very rural community off the main road, about a half a mile, secluded, surrounded by hills and trees. Our house cannot be seen except from the air. We raised our 3 children here. We participated in the many community activities, the fair, Covered Bridges Day, litter campaigns, PTA events, building tennis court and basketball court, power line opposition, community park management, etc., etc. We created several businesses over the years, logging, auto repair, farming within this community. Our lives are here. The present pipeline route, number 200, would pass through the tiny village of Newport, close to the Methodist Church and historic home on one side and close to the rescue squad and recreation center on the other. It would significantly impact the home of an elderly couple, come within 65 feet of their house. The route comes through our pastures for half a mile and an access road through our farmyard. Another property we own is crossed by half a mile of pipeline, plus a valve and permanent access road and staging areas. We feel targeted. These are just several of the issues we are concerned about. The ruralness of this area through which a scenic byway passes would be disturbed or forever ruined by the immensity of this project, because it would destroy woodlands, carve out paths down steep slopes, and come perilously close to several homes. It comes through significant karst terrain, which will require blasting. It comes with it in close proximity to many caves. The water which most of this rural community depends upon might be changed. All of these things are a part of a rural landscape. Forests, caves, water, farmlands, historic buildings. These things must be protected and preserved. Let me quote a passage from Jean Porterfield, in whose family her farm has remained over 200 years. Foundations of several old Porterfield homesteads can still be found on my farm. Remnants of old chestnut split rail fences dot the landscape. Rock fences border pasture fields. Family history and heritage binds us to this land. I know every nook and cranny on the farm. I know where the wet weather springs are. I know the spot where the creek sinks. I can find the rock that holds the giant seashell. These are the things that ground me to the place and provide my identity, and I take great offense that your experts consider their loss to be mitigatable and summarily dismiss them. Another longtime resident, George Jones, tells it this way. My cousin, Gordon Jones, was the bearer of very distressing news. He wanted to let me know that the talk of the small village of Newport was about a natural gas pipeline slated to be constructed within our beautiful rolling mountains and spring-fed streams. The Mountain Valley Pipeline project was coming. It was coming to determine if our ancient and unique piece of earth was unworthy enough for their treacherous means of exploiting what we faithfully believe to be God-given. He mentions a community event which still continues to this day, the Newport Fair, every summer beginning in 1936. For one day, they all gathered at the high school with the proof of the year's labor to be judged as the best. Folks entered vegetables, grains, livestock, baked goods, handmade goods, quilts, and flower arrangements, hoping to bring home the blue ribbon. We participated in contests such as crosscut sawing, jousting, and catching a greased pig. Such are the ways, yes, such are the ways the present community affairs and life are connected to the longtime culture of this Newport rural community. These are things that cannot be mitigated. A 42-inch pipe, 1,400 psi, 125-foot boundary coming over a scenic byway, down steep slopes after the removal of heavy tree growth beside old homes and buildings, and through dense karst terrain would destroy our community and way of life. We will not give this up lightly.
Thank you.